Uh, my name is Paula Despang, and I'll be your guide for this morning, or master of ceremonies, or whatever you want to call me. And welcome and settle as we settle into our shared sacred space. We're sharing it differently these days, electronically, and I'll invite you to um, leave yourself muted almost all the time, and unless it's your turn to talk, of course, and um, so that not everybody will have to hear your cat meowing and your dog barking and your phone chirping. So we'll just keep all those things quiet and have the sound coming from a chosen direction each time. So our first order of business today is to hear from our committees. We have committee leaders, and they're gonna, let's see, Kelly will be taking guidance on committee moments. So
Thank you, Mistress of Ceremony. I appreciate that. Paula, you always make me laugh.
thank you.
Okay, good morning. So what I would like to do is, if you are a committee chair or if you have an announcement that you would like to make, I would first like to see you raise your hand just in the regular human view. Just raise your human hand, and then we'll go to the virtual hands and chat. So I'm scanning through, and at this time, I
Chris
don't
Reed.
do a. Heck, I don't see any hands actually, except
Chris Reed.
Crystal's in the chat. But any human hands? Okay, we see Chris Reed. Go ahead, Chris. You have the mic.
Good morning. Good morning. I just wanted to give people a little more information on the group read that we talked about last week. We checked with Beacon Press, and we can get a 46% discount if we order at least 12 copies of White Fragility, which is quite a huge savings. So it would end up costing people $9, and that's including cost of postage for them to send us the books. So if people would let me know this week if they want to be included in that book order, we will go ahead and place it because it's a huge savings. And I've heard from a number of people who are interested, and I welcome participation. There's no limit in how many people can participate. So I hope to hear from many of you. You can send me an email. I'll put it in the chat, or call the church and leave a message. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you for leading the congregational read on this important issue. Okay, I'm still scanning for. Oh, okay, Evelyn, I see you. Just unmute yourself, Evelyn. Unmute your mic. There you go.
Okay. I had a question for Chris because I knew that the book had been completely sold out and was definitely out of print. And so I ended up getting a copy that I could print out here at home. But my son arranged, it was much cheaper to have it done at FedEx and not use up all my printer's ink or paper. But I wondered, when they said that they had all these copies available, did they do a reprint, or do you know?
We were just told by Beacon Press that we could order it and it would be available. So
good to know, because several people I know, including myself, have had trouble trying to get a copy that was a real copy as opposed to, a Nook copy or something other than that. And have you got a date for us to start?
Well, I was trying to make sure we had the books first. So
okay, that's fine.
If we feel like people have the books, then we will start, because I am anxious also.
Yes, very good. Thanks.
Thank you, Evelyn. Okay, so I do not see any more human hands, so we're going to go to the virtual. And Crystal, would you like to make your announcement, please?
Good morning. My name is Crystal. I have two announcements today. The first one is my rather repetitive at this point parent support group. I do want to make sure everybody who want to join has the option to join. The link can be found on the universityuus.org website, as well as in the various communications that have been emailed out to members. You can also drop me a message in the chat if you have other questions. In a different hat, Chloe McElroy has asked me to announce that Millennial Plus group, will be meeting on July 20th at 6:30 p.m. Via Zoom. If you have any questions or want more information about that, I'm going to put her contact information in the chat now. And that is open to anyone who self-identifies as a millennial. So thanks. Have a good day.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Crystal, and leading the way for parents and the support that you provide each other. You do such a great job, and it's really appreciated what you do for the parents in our congregation. And I just want to thank you for that. Okay, Margie, membership, would you like to go ahead and make an announcement? And unmute yourself, please.
There we go.
Margie.
Good morning. This is Margie Espaillat with membership. Just want to shout out a welcome to any visitors we might have. Glad to see you here. If you are a new visitor, please go to our website, universityuus.org. Go to connect, contact, and let us know who you are. With your contact information, we'll add you to our mailing list. It would be great if you have any kids, let us know their names and ages. There are lots of different groups, as you've probably already heard from the other committee heads, support groups with the church now that we're doing everything virtually, where we still keep connected, parent support, men's group, women's group, inquiring minds. But again, welcome and hope to see you again.
Thank you so much, Margie. Appreciate that. And I think that really wraps it up. If you have any other announcements that you're not ready to make at this point, please put them in the chat box. In our virtual chat room, we have messages from Crystal and Chris Reed and Amanda with links that you can actually copy and paste and maybe reach out to them a little bit later. So I think our mistress of ceremony, I'm going to hand it back over to you. And that's it for committee moments or minutes.
Okay. My opening words this morning come from Shel Silverstein. You may not be able to get it, but anyway, this is the picture. It's hot. I can't get cool. I've drunk a quart of lemonade. I think I'll take my shoes off and sit around in the shade. It's hot. My back is sticky. The sweat rolls down my chin. I think I'll take my clothes off and sit around in my skin. It is hot. I've tried with electric fans and pools and ice cream cones. I think I'll take my skin off and sit around in my bones. It is still hot. For those of you who don't know, Shel Silverstein was a poet no longer among us, and wrote several lovely books, including The Light in the Attic and Where the Sidewalk Ends and The Giving Tree, but also many choice bits of fun for Mad Magazine. So we will light our chalice and read with me together as we say this. In the light of truth and the warmth of love, we gather to seek, to sustain, and to share. As we affirm our relationship to each other, love is the spirit of this church, and service is its gift. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek truth in love, and to help one another. And another welcome to our guests. Another invitation to sign in on our website so we know who you are, and come to enjoy us. everybody's always welcome here. It doesn't matter what your background is or what your family looks like or what your spiritual history might be. You are welcome here among us. Join us and relax. We're going to have a sharing of our joys and concerns. We do that here. We share, each person shares their own stuff, and some people type theirs in to the chat part of this thing, and other people want to stick up their hands. And I'm going to turn that over to Amanda Major, who's very good at it.
Thank you so much, Paula. and those we hold silence in our hearts. Whenever you are ready, Paula.
We usually have time for all ages right now. Our director of religious education is in charge of that, and she's of course taking a month off. And so thinking we probably don't have that this morning, but we're going to be okay because Jim Coffin knows how to keep this thing rolling and keep us all engaged, whatever our age might be. He has experience. So we do see, here we go. We do have an offering. This is how you can tell we're really a church. We're going to collect an offering now, and you can do that electronically. There's a little note on your screen right now as to where to go. You can do that by phone. There's a number on your screen as to how to go about that. Or you could go old school and write a check and put it in the mail. How cool is that? So we'll have a little music and we'll have that going on. I love me a little bluegrass. So today our speaker is James Coffin, generally known as Jim Coffin, or if you want to be very, very proper, you say Elder Jim Coffin. He's a retired Seventh-day Adventist minister, and he's one of the movers and shakers in the Interfaith Council here in Central Florida. He's been in our pulpit before, and always something intriguing to say. So I'm going to turn the mic over to him now and mute myself.
Well, thank you much. As always, it's a pleasure to be with you. And the title of my presentation today is The Naming of Cats and Other Difficult Matters. And I've chosen that title as an adaptation of a great poem by T.S. Eliot. And it appears in a little book called Old Possum's Book of Practical Cats. So we want it to be practical, and so it will be. And this book, it says, I'm told, is actually a book about feline psychology and sociology. So this may be a somewhat foreign topic for some of you, but this book was actually used by Andrew Lloyd Webber in his 1981 musical Cats. And as you can see already, this is going to be a very erudite presentation today. So let's get started. The Naming of Cats by T.S. Eliot. But actually, before I get into the poem itself, I'd like to take just a moment to review a bit of the history of our naming of cats on the farm when I was a kid growing up. And some of the names that we had, because as Eliot says, it's an important matter that you name these cats in the right way. Now, when I was young, I had a very vivid imagination. It's kind of stultified now, not quite as vivid as it used to be. But when I was young, we would name these cats, and we had lots of them because we lived on a farm, and so these were working cats who had to make sure there were no rats and mice around the place. And so we had a wide variety of names, but one of the cats that was one of my favorites was a cat I called Waldo Gilmore. And in my mind, I had this fantasy land built up around cats, and they lived in a parallel reality to human beings, and they did the same kind of things as human beings. They were doctors and nurses and carpenters and farmers and you name it. And Waldo Gilmore was a life insurance salesman. Now, if you stop and think about it, in this fantasy imaginative character that I have built up, being a cat who sells life insurance when cats have 9 lives is kind of a problematic profession to be in. It's kind of like trying to sell snowballs to Eskimos, And so in my mind, poor Waldo Gilmore was always having trouble financially because he just couldn't get sales with his life insurance. We had another cat who was really one of my all-time favorite cats. His name was Leroy. And, Leroy has a lot of gravitas to the name. And if Jim Croce had written a song about bad man, Tommy Brown, that wouldn't have been nearly as impressive as bad man, Leroy Brown. And so with this cat, he was a very impressive black cat with just a little bit of white under his chin that kind of looked like a white bow tie that was there. And he was a really good cat. In fact, one day I heard my father make that statement: Leroy is a really good cat. Now, I watched cheerleaders at basketball games and that kind of thing, and they had these slogans that they would repeat over and over again, for their team. And so I developed a little slogan for Leroy. Leroy is a really good cat. Leroy is a really good cat. And I would mutter that whenever I was going around. And sometimes it just kind of happened accidentally when I was at school. I'd start into this, and it wasn't long before I got my friends into this chant. It was kind of like in Animal Farm, 4 legs bad, 2 legs bad, 4 legs good, like the sheep did. Anyway, it was very interesting to have these names of all these cats, and we had a wide variety of names, crazy names. But as T.S. Eliot says, the naming of cats is a difficult matter. Well, actually, I want to tell you about 2 more cats that we had. This was later, after I was married and we had kids, and we thought maybe it would be good for them to have pets. And we were living in Australia. And, my wife's an Australian and I'm an American. And 2 of the kids were born in Australia and one of them was born in America. And so every decision is an international decision that we have to make. There's diplomacy involved in this. It's not just a simple thing. It's a difficult matter. And so when we got these 2 cats, to name these 2 cats was really, it was a challenge. And how are we going to do this? And if we gave both cats American names, that wasn't going to work out well with the Australian contingent. And if we gave both of them Australian names, that wasn't going to work out. And so we came down with the solution that we would name the male cat Ned Kelly. And Ned Kelly was what they call a bush ranger in Australia. He was a desperado, an outlaw, kind of the Jesse James of Australia. And we named the female cat Calamity Jane. And so we satisfied the Americans, we satisfied the Australians. And just to show how important the naming of cats is, you know, since those cats were named that way and we satisfied both the Australians and the Americans, there has never been a major altercation between Australia and the United States, you know. And very, very important. The naming of cats is a difficult matter. It isn't just, well, actually, let me tell you one more story before we get into the naming of cats. When I went to college, I went to a small Seventh-day Adventist college just west of London in England. And I took an introduction to psychology class that was taught by a man who was a minister as well as an academician. And so we had a discussion one day in class about what constituted a psychological test, a valid psychological test. And there were restrictions, you know, it had the testing had to be done in the cultural context in which the ones being tested lived. It had to be done in the language of those being tested. And that's just to give you a little bit of background. We finished that discussion, and somehow the discussion came up then about whether human beings were animals or whether human beings were distinct and separate from animals. And the man, being a minister, wanted us to come up with the idea that human beings were distinct and separate from animals. And so he said that, you know, that human beings, and there was some discussion, not everybody agreed with him. He said human beings, you know, have a sophisticated language. And I raised my hand, and I was a bit of a smart aleck back then. I know that comes as a surprise to you, but actually, let me take a little detour. I don't know if you know Ben Friedman or not, but Ben Friedman is a local person here who is a lawyer by training, and he works for Chris King, who ran for lieutenant governor, and they just failed. They almost got there, but didn't get there. But anyway, Ben is very witty, very clever, and he's a Facebook friend, and it came up that it was his 30th birthday. And I thought, I have to say something really, really good. So I thought, well, I'll go to Google and find out. So I typed into Google smart aleck comment for birthday. And so what came up was, and this was quite a surprise. It said that the very first thing that came up after I'd put in smart aleck comment for birthday was a statement: if you're going to be a smart ass, first you have to be smart, otherwise you're just an ass. And so anyway, I thought, okay, I've been humbled. And so I told Ben, you know, this was my plan, was to give him this really smart aleck answer, but then I came across that statement and I decided I'd back off and just wish him a happy 30th birthday. Anyway, so here I am, smart aleck that I am. I raise my hand and I say to the teacher, how do you know that animals don't have a sophisticated language like humans do? In fact, maybe it's more so. Maybe animals communicate telepathically. And so the only time you hear an animal making any noise is extreme excitement, extreme pain, or you know, something of that nature. Otherwise, it's all done telepathically. And well, he said, we've tested animals, and there was another smart aleck kid in the back of the room who raises his hand, and he said, who wrote the tests? Did the dogs write the test for dogs? Did the cats write the test for cats? You know, was it in dog language? Was it in cat language? And if not, it's an invalid test. It hasn't proved anything. And so the teacher was trying to kind of figure out how to get around this. Well, he said, you know, humans have the capacity to worship God. And he said, animals don't have that capacity. I raised my hand again. I said, how do you know that the cat that walks out in front of the oncoming car and seems totally oblivious to everything that's going on, how do you know that that cat isn't contemplating God at such a high level that it just becomes completely detached from its surroundings? And about that time, the bell rang, and the teacher said, okay, we're not going to continue this discussion when we meet next time. And so that was done away with. So anyway, that was about cats. And so now the naming of cats is is a difficult matter. And I'd like to share the poem with you that Thomas Stearns Eliot wrote. The naming of cats or it's just called The Naming of Cats, but here's the whole poem. The naming of cats is a difficult matter. It isn't just one of your holiday games. You may think at first I'm mad as a hatter when I tell you a cat must have 3 different names. First of all, there's the name that the family use daily, such as Peter, Augustus, Alonzo, or James, such as Victor or Jonathan, George or Bill Bailey, all of them sensible, everyday names. There are fancier names if you think they sound sweeter. Some for the gentlemen, some for the dames, such as Plato, Admetus, Electra, Demeter, but all of them sensible, everyday names. But I tell you, a cat needs a name that's particular, a name that's peculiar and more dignified. Else, how can he hold up his tail perpendicular or spread out his whiskers and cherish his pride? Of the names of this kind, I can give you a quorum, such as Monkeystrap, Quaxo, or Coricapat, such as Bombalurina, or else Jelly Lorum, names that are never used for more than one cat. But above and beyond, there's still one name left over, and that is the name that you never will guess, the name that no human research can discover, but the cat himself knows and will never confess. When you notice a cat in profound meditation, the reason I tell you is always the same. His mind is engaged in a rapt contemplation of the thought, of the thought, of the thought of his name, his ineffable, effable, ephon, ineffable, deep and inscrutable singular name. And so we have the naming of cats, which is a difficult matter. Well, I'd like to kind of move away now from just talking about the cats themselves, but actually talk about let's go back. One more joke about cats. One more story about cats. The dog, the difference between a dog and a cat is really this. The dog says, the man who takes care of me, or there's the man who lives here in the house, takes care of me, he feeds me, he grooms me, he does everything. He must be God. That's the dog's perspective. The cat says, the man here in the house with me feeds me, grooms me, takes care of me completely. I must be God. And so that's the difference between dogs and cats. And so that's why the naming of cats is so important. But let's just move on a little bit from cats and let's talk about names. And when I came across this poem, which I really liked, you obviously got that idea. I also came across a kind of a critique of it or a commentary about it by a woman named Nandita Baxi Sheth. And she had this to say, and I found it quite interesting. Our names are out of our control. They were given to us before we knew ourselves by our parents, yet they define us. In this way, naming brings into existence. Naming transforms the general into a singularity. You are the species human being, and you have a name that makes you specific and singular. When you think about it, it's amazing, isn't it? Several words, first name, last name, middle name, serve to identify you. The same ones you use for your whole life, usually. The name is often the first thing you learn about a person. It's inscribed on every card in your wallet. It's what you fill out on every form. The very act of naming a child is a profound thing, and it's celebrated in many cultures. Names can hint at our ethnicity, our skin color, our accent. Names can evoke prejudice or open doors. Names can also conceal or trick or hide. No matter how polite we are, there is a pinprick of hurt when our names are mispronounced. It somehow negates us a bit. We worry about remembering the names of people whom we meet. People often say, I'm horrible with names. Our names are the language signifiers for our physical bodies, and I believe, more importantly, for our aura. Our names are simultaneously the most intimate possession we have, and yet carelessly shared with the world. I loved Eliot's poem for its playful unraveling of the concept of names, everyday names, fancy names, particular names, and of course, the wonderful, inscrutable name, the name that no human research can discover. I ask you, what is your ineffable, effable, effon ineffable, deep and inscrutable singular name? So that's where her little essay stopped, and there were 3 comments on it. I found them kind of interesting too. And they said this. The first one said, my name is Paul. The second one said, my name is Ina. And the third one said, my name is effin ineffable, and I'm thinking about it right now. So anyway, it's interesting with names, and within religion, names tend to play a very important role. I've done a little bit of research with Hindus and Muslims and Jews and Christians and others about the significance of names. And almost without exception, there is a great significance attached to names within a religion. And there's a kind of a magical, mystical power that gets attached to the name. In the Hebrew story of David going out to meet the giant Goliath, he says to Goliath, he kind of screams out to him, you come to me with a sword and with a spear and with a shield, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts. In fact, within the Bible, both the Hebrew part and the Christian part, the phrase in the name of appears 67 times. And it has this kind of, this sort of magical, mystical thing. In the Christian scriptures, we have Peter and John going to the temple to pray. There's a lame man there. He asks them to heal them, or actually he asks them for money. And they said, we don't have any silver or gold, but what we have, we give you. And then they say, in the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, rise up and walk. So both for the Jewish traditions and for the Christian traditions, this idea of speaking in the name of God is quite significant, but also significant in what Christians call the 10 Commandments back in Exodus and Deuteronomy. It says, using the King James Bible, thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless that takes his name in vain. And I find that interesting. And of course, typically, at least in most of the Christians that I've interacted with, they think of taking the name of the Lord in vain as if you smash your thumb and you utter something that, is probably not the best way to talk about things. But actually, I think that when it talks about taking the name of God in vain, it's saying that you attribute to God, or you bring God into the picture about something that doesn't deserve to have God's name attached to it. It's beneath that. And that can be just when I bring God in to bolster my position, and we sometimes hear people say, God told me, and so therefore that must really be it because God told me. And I would say, no, that's taking the name of God in vain because that doesn't deserve, that what you're putting forth doesn't deserve to be bolstered by God by the use of his name. Now, interestingly, the commandment goes on and it says, because you will not be held guiltless. It seems like typically God's pretty forgiving. But if you try to capitalize on his name and use it in a way that is self-serving and that is beneath the dignity of it, then you will not be held guiltless. Well, it's interesting that in secular society, we don't think of names as having quite the same mystical, magical power, and it's not tied to divinity in the same way. But it is interesting that we use the word name in a very metaphorical way. And so there are a lot of expressions, and I'll just cite just a very few, like you give something or someone a bad name. Now, it's not literally true, okay, but metaphorically, figuratively, it's true. Symbolically, it's true that you give them a bad name. Or we say things like, I arrest you in the name of the law. Or we say, in all but name, this person was this way. Or the other is in name only, you know, like rhinos and dinos, Republicans in name only, and the Democrats in name only. Well, you know, we use this in a metaphorical sense. Or lend your name to. In other words, your name, if you can, or make a name for yourself, or name dropping, or in the name of, and we've mentioned that already, or things like the name's Bond, James Bond, or your name is Mud, or protect your name. And so it's interesting that we use it in this metaphorical sense. And the reality is that there are some people whose behavior is such that you come to hate the name. You know, at one time, and it wasn't that many decades ago, the name Adolf was a popular name. You don't find many Adolfs today because the name has been ruined. Someone did give that a bad name. The name itself was given a bad name. And sometimes names are rehabilitated. You know, somebody has done something that has tarnished that particular name, but it gets rehabilitated. Interesting, and I've mentioned this before. My family heritage, the name Coffin, we come from a long line of Quakers and social activists and you know, social justice advocates and feminism advocates, abolitionists, the works. And just last week, I got an invitation to join a Facebook group that was about the descendants of Tristram Coffin, who was the first coffin to come out from England in 1642. And because of the work of Levi Coffin, who was a very staunch abolitionist and who was called the president of the Underground Railroad, we kind of think of coffins as being all against slavery, all of them anti-racism. And so I was invited to sign up for this Facebook group that is the descendants of Tristram Coffin. And the discussion that was going on was that some of the people on the group had just discovered that in South Carolina, there was a coffin plantation where somebody by the name of Coffin was a slave owner. And they were just beside themselves that the name had been blighted that way, or that they had discovered that the name had been blighted in that way. You know, and they said, wouldn't it be ironic if Levi Coffin helped a slave escape from the Coffin plantation in South Carolina? You know, wouldn't that be just amazing? And it's interesting how names are sort of connected that way. And in fact, in biblical times, if someone went through a really dramatic experience, they would sometimes say, you know, I'm a different person now. And so I need to have a different name. So we have Abram, who becomes Abraham, Sarai, who becomes Sarah. In the Christian scriptures, we have Saul, who becomes Paul, and then becomes you know, a great leader. In fact, I myself have gone through a bit of metamorphosis of name, because when I was growing up, I was Jimmy, and then I became Jim. And now if I want to be impressive and have gravitas, I go back to the birth name, the legal name that I have, and I'm James. And so it's interesting. I got a text just a couple of days ago, because one of my friends growing up had some health issues. And so his sister wrote to me to let me know about it. And it starts off, Dear Jimmy. And when I hear that, I go, okay, this is going back at least, X number of decades, because we don't do that anymore. The interesting thing about names is that we not only have our own name, but we have groups that we belong to, and we protect the name of that group that we belong to. And those groups vary. It can be the name of a religion. It can be Democrat, Libertarian, Republican. It can be MD, JD, CPA. It can be Jew, Christian, Hindu, Unitarian, Universalist, but we connect to certain groups. I'll tell you a quick story. In the Seventh-day Adventist Church, one of the things that used to be kind of a norm, a rite of passage, was that we went out and sold religious books when we were young. Late teens, early 20s, high school, late high school, college, kind of like the Mormons with their missionary programs. And so I went out to sell books one summer just after I graduated from high school. And I was told during the training period that in the area where I had been, there'd been an adult bookseller who was no longer there. And I got the idea that, there may have been something that wasn't quite what it was supposed to be. And so he had been moved on, but they didn't tell me any detail. One day I knocked on a door, and I was selling the 10-volume Bible story set. And I knock on a door, and the guy says, come in. And so I go in, and I show him what I'm doing. I'm selling these books. And I said, do you have children? He said, well, I kind of have children. I wasn't sure what that meant. And anyway, I said, well, would you be interested in these books for your children? And he said, well, not really. He said, my wife already has those books. He said, a salesman came and sold them to her. And he said, he was really quite a salesman. In fact, he said he was such a great salesman that he's going to marry her in 2 months. He said, I suppose you're a Seventh-day Adventist too. And so I wasn't quite sure how to answer that, And, as a representative of Seventh-day Adventism, I said, this hasn't done much for our name. It hasn't done much for our name. And the reality is that we have group associations and affiliations where we protect the name of the group if we're a part of it. Now, obviously, that happened to me as a Seventh-day Adventist, but now I want to talk to you just very briefly here in closing about the name of your religious affiliation. And so I'd like to just do a little analysis. Actually, I went through and did a little Google searching on Unitarian Universalists and naming your congregations. I found it quite interesting. If you haven't done it, you probably did because you've gone through a name change recently. But there were quite a few commentaries that were posted. There were quite a few things officially posted. And one of the things they said, be careful about abbreviations, be careful about nicknames that are going to arise out of what you've chosen, be careful about acronyms. For example, they said, don't say that this is the Second Unitarian Church of Kingsford, because if it becomes an acronym, not so good, and so anyway, I wanted to talk just a little bit about your name. And it starts off university. And that's kind of a bonus for you. The fact that you happen to be close to a university where the implications of that word are research, rationality, science, digging deep. And so that's something that we come to expect when you put that kind of thing in your name, even though it really has to do with physical proximity, maybe more than it has to do with ideology. But it still is a word that lifts you, elevates you, gives you gravitas. And so you need to keep that in mind. Unitarian. A lot of people haven't really thought about it probably, but the word Unitarian suggests that you're willing to go against the mainstream, that you're willing to take a position that is different. And this goes back centuries into your history, where you said the main group may be going that way, we're going another group because we believe that there's a better way to view this particular matter. And so, there's the connotation in your name of being willing to stand up and be different. Then you have Not only is it university, and not only is it Unitarian, but it's universalist as well. Because you were a group of people who, again, chose to go against the mainstream and said, we can't imagine a deity that would be willing to have people roasted and toasted in hell forever. And so you think about the whole thing, and you know, humanity was made for fellowship. It was made for ongoing fellowship, and you couldn't envision a human relationship. You couldn't envision a human divine relationship that wouldn't be all inclusive and wouldn't be universalist in nature. So then you put that together, and it all comes together in a fellowship where you say, we're going to act this out. And you know, I would like to challenge you to think of your name not only as a noun, a collection of nouns, but I'd like to have you think of it as a verb. There's action involved. You know, there's something that should be lived out so that that name actually makes a difference. That name actually stands for something that people in the community appreciate and benefit from and are blessed by. Thomas Stearns Eliot said that the naming of cats is a difficult matter. The naming of congregations is even a more difficult matter. But the living out of the name of the congregation is a more difficult matter still. But it's a wonderful challenge. It's a great privilege for you. It's an opportunity. And it's a chance, if you keep that being in front of you as a vision and as a challenge, it's a chance to make the world a better place. And so I challenge you to do that. That's it. As they say in the Anglican tradition, here ends the first reading. In fact, here ends the only reading. Thank you very much. It's been great to be with you.
And all the people said, amen. I'm going to extinguish my chalice at this time with your support, and you can extinguish the one that you lit as well. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. My closing words come from Joel Miller. Let our lives be a prayer that waters dry souls, mends broken hearts, refuses to be terrorized, seeks this world's beauty, and carries us through its storms. Thank you. You may linger a little longer and chat here as we are finished, or you may go. But whatever time you go,